So let me how can I put this? A horse. How about an argument like this? Now, I've heard what I think might be this kind of line of argumentation from you before, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So if someone were to say something like, and it seems absurd on the surface, but if they said something like, well, what if it's the case that universes are the only thing which can come into being out of nothing, right? A horse can't come into being out of nothing, but there's something about the universe, and we already know that the universe is a special kind of something compared to everything within the universe. It seems to kind of have, we need to think about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Could we not say something like, well, maybe things do come into being all the time, except the only thing that can come into being out of nothing is a universe, and therefore we wouldn't be able to observe it?
As Anne Pryor said, prior to its existence, the universe doesn't exist so as to constrain what can come into being or not. So you can't say that only things of a certain kind can come into being without efficient causes, because without their causes, there just isn't anything to constrain it. So I don't think that you can say that only certain kinds of things can come into being without efficient causes.
Yeah, now the argument that I didn't want to put it in your mouth was one that I've heard elsewhere. People would say the argument that the reason you can't say that only universes can come into being out of nothing is because nothing doesn't have any properties, and so therefore can't have a kind of preference for universes over other things.
Yeah.
My response to that was to say, what if the necessity of it being a universe is not a property of the nothing, but a property of the thing? And let me explain myself. For example, if we human beings create a circle, it has to be round, right? We can't create a square circle.
Right.
But that's not due to a property of us. That's due to a property of the circle, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way, although nothing has no properties and so can't prefer universes, what if it can only... What if only universes can come from nothing because of a property of the universe, not because of a property of nothing?
Right. That is exactly what you would have to say, because as you say, properties only inhere in existing things. Beings have properties, not non-being. So you'd have to say it's an inherent property of the universe that it can spring into existence without a cause. And I just can't make sense of that.
Which sounds absurd.
Something that doesn't exist come into existence without a cause because it has a property after it comes into existence.
Yeah,
I mean,
it sounds strange, but the reason why I think it's useful to think in those terms, or at least of the possibility of it happening, is because specifically the objection that why don't things pop into existence all the time? I suppose what I'm trying to do is make at least a far-fetched case. I'm trying to show at least a possibility that things could come into existence out of nothing, and yet by definition, we'd be incapable of witnessing it. So maybe things do come into existence out of nothing all the time, but because these are only universes, we'll never be able to observe it. We'll never be able to see it.
Let me commend you for your method, Alex, because by pushing these questions, what you help the atheist to see is the intellectual price tag of his atheism. And I think that's very valuable. One of the goals of the Christian apologist will be to try to raise the intellectual price tag of non-belief. And if non-belief or non-theism requires me to be a mereological nihilist, to think that things have an intrinsic property, that they can come into being, that other things don't have, this is all raising the intellectual price tag of non-belief. For me, at least, Alex, just way, way beyond what I'm willing to pay. And so that's helpful that you're doing this.
That is a really, really interesting way of thinking about apologetics, and the argument that we're having is kind of like, what's the better deal here, right? Because both worldviews seem at least consistent, but you've got to ask yourself, how much you're willing to sacrifice of your intuitions, how much you're willing to sacrifice of the beliefs that you think are true in order to hold to those conclusions. And the key point is taking the justifications that we're giving and showing what they lead to, right? Because a lot of people consider, well, this argument may allow this to be the case, but they don't think that if you accept that justification, it can also lead over here, and you don't want that, right? And so I think this discussion has demonstrated that every time you think of a justification for a point you're trying to raise, you have to consider the implications of that justification and the other areas of philosophy it causes you to sacrifice. That's a really, really fascinating way of thinking about it. And I think it's a great place to end this conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on today. This has been an unexpectedly rich and thought-provoking conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
That's really wonderful to hear, because I remember kind of wanting to have you on, and I didn't tell anybody that this will be released without my followers knowing before it happened. But if I did tell them, they'd probably be saying, go and debate him, go and show him what's what. And it's like, I would never dream of trying to do that with someone of your caliber, of your caliber. So I just wanted to kind of ask questions. So I'm glad to hear that it's kind of led to this kind of conversation, especially it's gone in directions I didn't think it would go in. But it has been fascinating.